Have you ever felt it? That quiet, creeping sense that you are not in control. It happens in the smallest of moments. An unexpected criticism that leaves you replaying words for hours. A sudden change of plans that throws your entire day into disarray. A wave of anxiety about a future that has not yet arrived. In those moments, we feel fragile, as if our inner peace is a delicate glass sculpture that the slightest tremor can shatter. We believe we are rational beings, commanders of our own lives, until life applies the slightest pressure, and we discover we are merely reacting, slaves to a script we never wrote. It is easy to feel intelligent and composed when the seas are calm. It is easy to preach logic when there is no emotional storm on the horizon. But the true measure of a person's strength, of their wisdom, is not found in the peaceful harbor, but in the heart of the tempest. Can you remain grounded when the world around you is spinning? Can you find clarity when your mind is clouded with fear, anger, or despair? Most cannot. 90% of people live their lives in a state of perpetual reaction. They are puppets, and their strings are pulled by external events, by the opinions of others, by their own untamed emotions. They believe their happiness is something to be found out there, in a better job, a different relationship, a more favorable circumstance. And so, they spend their lives chasing shadows, forever at the mercy of things they cannot control. But there is another way. A path forged over 2 millennia ago by philosophers who were also soldiers, senators, and survivors. This is the path of Stoicism. It is not a philosophy for the classroom, it is a philosophy for the battlefield of life. It offers no easy answers or comforting platitudes. Instead, it offers a set of tools, hard, practical, and brutally effective, for forging an unconquerable mind. An inner citadel that no external chaos can breach. This journey is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming the master of your emotions. It is not about knowing more, it is about seeing more clearly. By embracing the disciplines that follow, you will learn to transform your mind from a fragile vessel tossed by the waves into a steady, unyielding lighthouse that guides you through any storm. You will not just become calmer. You will become wiser, more resilient, and more formidable than you ever thought possible. Because once you master the only thing you truly have dominion over, your own mind, you become mentally unshakable. Let us begin. Discipline 1, master your sails, not the sea, let go of what you can't control. The foundation of all Stoic practice, the master key that unlocks every other door to inner peace, begins with a single, ruthless distinction, separating what is within your control from what is not. Most human misery, the Stoics argued, is not born from hardship itself, but from the futile and exhausting attempt to command the uncontrollable. We rage at the traffic. We lament the weather. We despair over the economy. We are tormented by what other people think of us. We exhaust our precious and finite mental energy battling phantoms, trying to bend the vast, indifferent universe to our will. The wise person, the Stoic practitioner, understands this is a fool's errand. They recognize that life is not a predictable equation to be solved, but a vast, wild ocean. You cannot command the winds or calm the waves. To try is to invite madness and frustration. But you can, and you must, become the absolute master of your own ship, your thoughts, your judgments, your choices, your actions. That is where your true power lies. Think of it this way. An archer preparing for a competition can control countless variables. They can control their diet, their sleep, their training regimen. They can practice their stance 1,000 times, perfect their grip, and master their breathing until it is a subconscious rhythm. They can select the finest bow and the straightest arrows. All of this is within their power. But the moment the arrow leaves the bow, it enters a world beyond their command. A sudden gust of wind, a distraction in the crowd, the subtle warping of the target, these things are the domain of fate. The novice archer, whose happiness is tied to the arrow hitting the bullseye, will be a nervous wreck. Their peace is held hostage by the wind. But the Stoic archer has already found their victory in the perfection of their form. They did everything within their power with excellence and virtue. The outcome is secondary. They have learned to let go. This mental habit is not passive resignation. It is a strategic reallocation of energy. It is a form of spiritual triage. Every moment you spend worrying about something you cannot change is a moment of strength you did not invest in what you can. Every ounce of anger you expend on another's actions is an ounce of clarity you have stolen from yourself. Consider the story of a modern-day entrepreneur, a woman named Clara who launched a tech startup with her life savings. For 2 years, she worked tirelessly, building a brilliant product. But just as she was about to launch, a global recession hit. The market for investment capital dried up overnight. Her potential customers were cutting budgets, not buying new software. A reactive person would have collapsed. They would have cursed their luck, blamed the economy, and drowned in a sea of what-ifs. It would be the end of their story. But Clara, a student of Stoicism, performed a different calculus. She sat down with a piece of paper and drew a line down the middle. On one side, she wrote, "Things I cannot control, the global economy, investor fear, customer budgets." On the other, "Things I can control, my response, my work ethic, my creativity, my expenses, my outreach strategy." She let go of the anger and despair over the recession. It was the weather, a storm she could not stop. Instead, she poured all her energy into her side of the page. She radically cut her business expenses. She pivoted her marketing to focus on how her product could save companies money during a recession. She personally reached out to a small, dedicated group of early users, building a community instead of chasing a mass market. A year later, while other startups had vanished, hers was lean, resilient, and profitable. She didn't control the storm, but she had become a master sailor. This is the training. It begins with the smallest irritations of daily life, for they are the gym where you build your inner strength. The person who cuts you off in traffic. A chance to practice letting go. A meeting that runs late. An opportunity to practice patience. A critical comment online. A drill in maintaining your inner composure. Here is your first exercise. For the next 24 hours, become a detective of your own mind. Carry a small notebook or use a note on your phone. Every time you feel a surge of frustration, anger, or anxiety, pause and write down the trigger. Then, next to it, write down whether that trigger was something within your control or outside of it. Do not judge, simply observe. At the end of the day, look at your list. You will likely be stunned to see how much of your inner turmoil is generated by fighting battles you were never meant to win. This practice, repeated over time, will fundamentally rewire your brain. You will stop seeing life as a series of things that happen to you and start seeing it as a series of opportunities to respond with virtue. You will conserve your energy, sharpen your focus, and build a foundation of tranquility that the chaos of the world cannot touch. And once you have mastered this first, most crucial discipline, you will be ready for the next. For once you know not to fear the uncontrollable, you must learn how to prepare for it. Discipline 2, the mental dress rehearsal, rehearse the worst-case scenario. In the minds of most people, the future is a place of hope, a sunlit land where their plans will unfold without a hitch. They live in a state of quiet, unexamined optimism. They assume their health will hold, their job will be secure, their loved ones will always be there. They avoid thinking about loss, failure, or tragedy, believing that to even entertain such thoughts is to invite them into reality. They are walking through life with their eyes closed, and because of this, they are profoundly fragile. The Stoic takes the opposite path. They walk toward the darkness, not to embrace it, but to understand it. They practice an exercise that is at once terrifying and liberating, premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This is not an indulgence in pessimism. It is a powerful psychological inoculation. It is the practice of rehearsing the worst-case scenarios in your mind so that if they ever come to pass, you are not shattered by the shock. The person who has never contemplated poverty will be destroyed if they lose their wealth. The person who has never imagined loneliness will be lost if a relationship ends. The person who has never confronted the thought of their own mortality will be paralyzed by a serious diagnosis. The Stoic, however, has visited these dark lands in their imagination. They have sat with the discomfort, examined the fear, and charted a course for how they would endure. They have, in essence, trained for disaster. Think of an astronaut preparing for a mission. The engineers do not just plan for a perfect launch. They spend thousands of hours simulating every conceivable failure, an engine malfunction, a computer glitch, a cabin depressurization. They force the astronauts to confront these scenarios over and over again in a simulator, not to make them fearful, but to make them prepared. When you have faced a crisis 100 times in training, if it happens in reality, you do not panic. You act. Your training takes over. Premeditatio malorum is your mind simulator. Let me share with you the story of a man who embodied this principle in the face of unimaginable adversity. James Stockdale was a U.S. Navy pilot whose plane was shot down over Vietnam in 1965. He was held as a prisoner of war in the infamous Hanoi Hilton for over 7 years. He was tortured repeatedly, held in solitary confinement, and lived with the constant threat of death. Many of his fellow prisoners did not survive, not just from the physical abuse, but from the psychological collapse. The optimists, Stockdale later observed, were often the first to break. They would tell themselves, "We'll be out by Christmas." Christmas would come and go. Then they'd say, "We'll be out by Easter." And Easter would come and go. Their hope, untethered from reality, became a source of repeated, crushing disappointment. Stockdale survived because he blended a deep faith that he would ultimately prevail with a brutal acceptance of his present reality. He confronted the worst possibilities daily. He imagined being tortured to death. He imagined never seeing his family again. By facing these fears, he stripped them of their power to surprise him. He knew he could not control his captors or his circumstances, but he could control his mind. He developed an internal code of conduct, a system of covert communication, and a will to resist that his torturers could never break. He had rehearsed for this, and so he endured. You do not need to be in a prison camp to practice this discipline. You can begin tonight. Before you go to sleep, take a few quiet moments. Choose one thing in your life that you value deeply, your job, a cherished relationship, your physical health. Now, calmly and deliberately, imagine that it is gone. What would you do? How would you respond? Walk through the first hours, the first days. Feel the imagined pain, but do not wallow in it. Instead, focus on how you would endure. What inner resources would you call upon? What virtues, courage, resilience, wisdom, would this situation demand of you? Who would you turn to for support? What is the very first practical step you would take to begin rebuilding? This is not a morbid exercise. It serves two profound purposes. First, it dramatically increases your gratitude for what you have right now. When you have imagined life without your partner, you hold them a little closer. When you have contemplated life without your health, a simple walk in the park becomes a thing of beauty. Second, it builds a deep and abiding resilience. You are gently, systematically, exposing your mind to the idea of loss, making you less fragile and more prepared for the inevitable blows that life delivers. Most people live in fear of the future. The Stoic trains to meet it. They do not hope for an easy life, they build the strength to endure a difficult one. This quiet, private rehearsal is one of the most powerful habits you can cultivate. It is the forging of an unshakable mind. And when you have learned to prepare for adversity, you are ready to learn how to meet it in the moment it arrives. Discipline 3, the sacred pause, pause between stimulus and response. Your life is not defined by the grand, sweeping moments, but by the tiny, almost imperceptible gaps between them. It is in these microscopic spaces, in the breath you take before you reply, in the moment of stillness before you act, that your entire destiny is forged. Most of humanity is oblivious to this space. They live in a world of pure, unthinking reflex. A stimulus occurs, An insult, a frustration, a temptation, and a reaction follows as surely as a puppet's leg jerks when its string is pulled. There is no thought, no choice, no freedom. There is only the well-worn groove of habit. A harsh word is met with a harsher one. A traffic jam is met with a surge of rage. A notification on a phone is met with an immediate, compulsive glance. People believe they are making choices, but they are not. They are running a program. The Stoics understood that the greatest liberation a human being can achieve is to find and widen that space between stimulus and response. Within that sacred pause lies the power to choose. The power to override the primal, emotional instinct and engage the higher, rational mind. The power to respond, not react. The power to be the master of your own soul, not a slave to your impulses. Consider the story of a young samurai in feudal Japan. He was skilled with the sword, but his temper was a wildfire. During a sparring session, an older, master samurai lightly tapped him on the head, a sign of a critical opening in his defense. Humiliated in front of the other students, the young samurai's vision turned red with rage. His hand flew to the hilt of his katana, ready to draw and strike down the master for the perceived insult. But the master did not flinch. He simply stood there, his eyes calm and unwavering, and said, "A sword that is too quick to leave its sheath is a tool of anger, not a weapon of a warrior. Your anger is the opening I saw, not your stance." In that moment, the young man froze. The master's words had landed in that space between the insult and his action. He saw his rage for what it was, a blind, self-destructive force. He slowly took his hand off his sword and bowed deeply, not in defeat, but in understanding. He had almost lost his life and honor not to a superior swordsman, but to his own untamed reaction. From that day on, his training was not just of the body, but of the pause. He learned that true mastery was not in the speed of the draw, but in the wisdom of knowing when not to draw at all. You can practice this discipline every single day. It requires no special equipment, only a commitment to awareness. The next time you feel that familiar surge of emotion, the heat of anger, the sting of defensiveness, the pull of anxiety, that is your signal. This is the moment of training. Instead of letting the emotion consume you, perform a simple, conscious action. Take one deep, deliberate breath. Feel the air enter your lungs and then slowly release it. This act is more than just a calming technique, it is a neurological circuit breaker. It momentarily disengages the amygdala, the brain's primitive fear center, and allows the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and judgment, to come online. In that single breath, you create the space. You go from being in the emotion to observing the emotion. You are no longer the storm, you are the sky watching the storm pass. And from that vantage point, you can choose. You can choose to speak with reason instead of rage. You can choose to meet criticism with curiosity instead of defensiveness. You can choose to let a minor annoyance go instead of letting it ruin your day. Here is your training. For 1 week, make the pause your primary focus. When your phone buzzes, wait 3 full seconds before looking at it. When someone finishes speaking, wait 1 full second before you formulate your reply. When you feel anger rising in you, excuse yourself to the bathroom and take 10 deep breaths before re-engaging. These are not grand gestures. No one else will notice them. But they are profound acts of self-mastery. Each time you successfully create that pause, you are strengthening your mental discipline. You are weakening the chains of unconscious reaction and forging the habit of conscious response. You are moving from being a puppet of your circumstances to becoming the architect of your character. This is the path to becoming unshakable. Not by being cold or unfeeling, but by being deliberate, purposeful, and in command of that sacred space where your true freedom is born. And once you have learned to control your response, you must take the next step, to question the very perceptions that trigger that response in the first place. Discipline 4, become the Socratic interrogator, question everything, even yourself. There is a silent, invisible force that governs the lives of most people. It dictates their emotions, drives their actions, and constructs their reality. This force is not fate or circumstance. It is the tyranny of their own unexamined assumptions. People do not respond to the world as it is, they respond to the stories they tell themselves about the world. And most of these stories are deeply flawed. We believe, my boss doesn't respect me. This relationship is doomed. I'm not good enough for that promotion. We treat these thoughts not as interpretations, but as facts carved in stone. We then act on them, and in doing so, we often create the very reality we feared. This is the prison of the unexamined mind. A wise person, a Stoic practitioner, lives by a different code. They cultivate the habit of radical skepticism, especially towards their own first impressions. They understand that the initial thought or emotion that arises in response to an event is often just a primitive echo of past fears, insecurities, and ingrained biases. It is not truth, it is merely data. And all data must be cross-examined before a verdict is reached. They do not ask, why is this happening to me? They ask a far more powerful and dangerous question, is the story I'm telling myself true? This is not a practice of self-doubt, it is a practice of intellectual rigor. It is turning the Socratic method inward, becoming the relentless interrogator of your own mind. Imagine a scientist working in a laboratory. She has a hypothesis she has cherished for years. But a new experiment yields data that contradicts it. A reactive, ego-driven person would find a way to dismiss the data. They would claim the experiment was flawed, the equipment was faulty, or they would massage the numbers to fit their cherished belief. They would protect their ego at the expense of the truth. But a true scientist does the opposite. She actively seeks to disprove her own hypothesis. She sees the contradictory data not as a personal failure, but as an exciting mystery. Her loyalty is not to being right, her loyalty is to the truth. She asks, what if I'm wrong? What else could this data mean? And in that questioning, a new, more accurate understanding of reality is born. You must become the scientist of your own life. Your beliefs about yourself, about others, and about the world are your hypotheses. You must be willing to put them to the test, to ruthlessly seek out disconfirming evidence. Let me tell you about a man named David, a manager at a mid-sized company who was convinced one of his team members, Sarah, was lazy and unmotivated. His story was simple: Sarah is always late with her reports and seems disengaged in meetings. She clearly doesn't care about her job. This story colored all of his interactions with her. He micromanaged her, spoke to her with a tone of disappointment, and overlooked her for new projects. Unsurprisingly, Sarah's performance worsened, confirming his original story. One day, after learning about Stoic principles, David decided to try an experiment. He decided to question his own story. For 1 week, he would operate under a different hypothesis: perhaps there is a reason for Sarah's behavior that I do not understand. Instead of just observing her actions, he started observing his own. He noticed his critical tone. He noticed how he never asked her about her life outside of work. During their next one-on-one, instead of asking about a late report, he asked, "How are you doing? I've noticed you seem a bit distant lately, and I wanted to make sure everything is okay." Sarah was taken aback, then her eyes filled with tears. She revealed that her mother had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and she was her primary caregiver. She was exhausted, distracted, and overwhelmed with grief. David's entire reality shifted. The lazy employee was a devoted daughter carrying an impossible burden. His story had not been a fact, it had been a fiction born from a lack of information. By questioning himself, he didn't just salvage a working relationship, he recovered a piece of his own humanity. Here is your training. Create a thought journal. Each evening, write down one strong judgment you made that day, about a person, a situation, or yourself. For example, my friend ignored my text, they must be angry with me. Then, under that judgment, you must write 3 alternative explanations. They are busy at work. Their phone battery died. They are dealing with a personal issue and haven't seen it. This exercise forces your brain out of its lazy, automatic storytelling mode. It trains the muscle of cognitive flexibility. You learn that your first interpretation is rarely the only one, and almost never the truest one. The person who can question their own certainty is the person who cannot be easily manipulated. They are not swayed by propaganda, by office gossip, or by their own emotional biases. They are free because their allegiance is to reality, not to the comforting stories they tell themselves. This is the sharp, dangerous clarity of a mind that has learned to question itself. Discipline 5. Strip the bark from the tree. Don't rush to label things as good or bad. The human mind is a labeling machine. The moment an event occurs, we rush to stick a tag on it: good, bad, lucky, unlucky, fair, unfair, a success, a failure. We do this so quickly, so automatically, that we mistake our label for the event itself. And once the label is applied, it acts as a powerful filter, coloring our entire perception and dictating our emotional response. A delayed flight is instantly labeled bad, and we are filled with frustration. A surprise compliment is labeled good, and we are filled with pleasure. A project getting cancelled is a disaster. Winning a small prize is a stroke of luck. But the Stoics teach a radical and liberating truth: events themselves are neutral. They are objective occurrences, stripped of inherent meaning. It is only our judgment, our internal label, that makes them seem good or bad. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now. This is one of the most profound skills of a trained mind, the ability to resist the compulsive urge to label, and instead, to see things for what they are: raw, unadorned facts. Think of it like this. Imagine a tree. You can describe it objectively: it is a deciduous tree, 30 feet tall, with a trunk circumference of 5 feet, and green leaves. This is reality. But our minds are not content with that. We add layers of judgment: it's a beautiful tree. Or, it's an ugly, misshapen tree that's blocking my view. Or, that's the annoying tree that drops leaves all over my lawn. The tree has not changed. Only our subjective interpretation has. The pain or pleasure comes not from the tree, but from the label we have attached to it. A wise person learns to mentally strip the bark from the tree. They practice seeing the world in objective terms. Instead of saying, "I had a terrible day at work," they would say, "I received critical feedback on a report, and a meeting was postponed." The facts are the same, but the emotional charge is gone. By refusing to apply the label of terrible, they prevent the downward spiral of negative emotion and preserve their ability to respond rationally. Let's consider a modern story. A young chef, Leo, pours his heart into opening his first restaurant. On opening night, a prominent food critic visits and later publishes a scathing review. The critic calls the food uninspired and the ambience pretentious. A reactive person would immediately label this event a disaster. Their dream would be crushed. They might lash out at the critic, despair over their failure, and perhaps even close the restaurant. The label disaster would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But Leo, practicing the Stoic discipline, chooses a different path. He reads the review and consciously refuses to label it. Instead, he breaks it down into objective facts. A person, who writes about food for a living, tasted my dishes and wrote an article expressing their negative opinion. Some of the specific criticisms were about the salt level in the risotto and the slow service for the main course. Stripped of the emotional labels like scathing and disaster, the event becomes manageable. It is no longer a personal attack on his soul, it is a set of data points. He can now analyze this data rationally. He tastes the risotto again and concedes it is a bit too salty. He talks to his staff and realizes they were understaffed for the main course rush. The critic's review, once he stripped it of its judgmental language, became a free consultation. He used the objective feedback to improve his menu and his service. A year later, his restaurant was one of the most popular in the city. The event that could have been a disaster became the catalyst for his success. Nothing about the event changed, only his interpretation. Here is your training. For the next 3 days, become an objective reporter of your own life. When you talk about your day, either to yourself or to others, you are forbidden from using emotional, judgmental labels. Instead of, "My boss was a jerk today," say, "My boss spoke to me in a raised voice." Instead of, "I had a great workout," say, "I ran 3 miles and lifted weights for 30 minutes." Instead of, "This traffic is a nightmare," say, "There are many cars on the road, and my travel time is extended." This practice will feel unnatural at first. It will highlight how addicted our minds are to drama and emotional labeling. But as you persist, you will begin to feel a profound sense of calm and clarity. You are no longer being tossed about by the stories you tell yourself. You are seeing the world as it is. The person who masters this discipline becomes incredibly resilient. They are not immune to hardship, but they are immune to the secondary layer of suffering created by their own judgments. They can face criticism, failure, and misfortune with a steady mind, because they see these things not as bad, but simply as what is happening. And from that place of objective clarity, they can always choose the most effective response. Discipline 6. Live in the shadow of the end. Always remember you will die. There is a thought so powerful, so clarifying, that it has the ability to instantly vaporize the trivial anxieties and distractions that consume our lives. It is a thought that most people spend their entire existence trying to avoid, hiding from it in the noise of entertainment, the busyness of work, and the fantasy of a limitless future. The thought is this: you are going to die. For the Stoic, this is not a morbid obsession. It is the ultimate tool for living well. Memento mori, remember that you will die, is not a whispered threat, it is a battle cry for a life of purpose, urgency, and profound appreciation. The awareness of death does not cast a dark shadow over life, it is the brilliant, clarifying light by which we can finally see what truly matters. Think about your worries from this morning. An awkward email you had to send. A bit of gossip you heard. The desire for a new phone or a more impressive car. Now, hold those worries up against the stark, undeniable fact of your own mortality. They dissolve into nothingness, don't they? They are revealed for what they are, meaningless distractions from the sacred, finite gift of your time. Most people live as though they are immortal. They postpone the call to their parents. They put off the creative project that their soul longs to start. They withhold the words of love and forgiveness. They endure jobs they despise and relationships that drain them, always telling themselves, "I'll make a change, someday." They are living in a dream, and the practice of memento mori is the cold splash of water that wakes them up. Steve Jobs, in his famous 2005 Stanford commencement address, spoke of this with piercing clarity. He said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important." The thought of his own finitude was not a source of despair for Jobs, it was his primary operating system. It was the filter through which he made every decision. It gave him the courage to drop out of college and follow his curiosity, to build Apple, to be fired from Apple, and to return to save it with a ferocious, uncompromising vision. He did not have time to waste on mediocrity, on focus groups, or on living someone else's life. Death was his advisor, constantly reminding him to get on with the essential. Here is your training. Find a small, simple object, a coin, a stone, a ring, and designate it as your memento mori token. Place it on your desk, in your pocket, or by your bedside. Several times a day, whenever you see or touch it, you must pause for a moment and consciously bring to mind the thought, "This life is finite. This day will not come again." This is not to induce anxiety. It is to cultivate presence. When you remember death before you start your workday, you are more likely to focus on the tasks that truly move the needle, not the ones that just keep you busy. When you remember death before you speak to a loved one, you are more likely to speak with kindness and attention, not with distracted indifference. When you remember death in a moment of anger or envy, you are more likely to let it go, realizing its profound insignificance in the grand scheme of things. Furthermore, you can integrate this into a weekly reflection. Every Sunday evening, take 10 minutes and ask yourself, if I were to learn that I only had 1 month left to live, what would I change about my life starting tomorrow? What would I stop doing immediately? Who would I need to speak to? What would I finally give myself permission to start? Write down your answers. You do not have to act on all of them, but the clarity you gain will be immense. You will begin to see the vast chasm between the life you are currently living and the life your deeper self knows you are meant to live. The person who befriends their own mortality is not afraid of dying. They are afraid of not having truly lived. This awareness makes them wiser, braver, and strangely, more joyful than 90% of the people who are running from the one certainty that awaits us all. They savor their meals, they feel the warmth of the sun, they engage in their work with a focused intensity, because they know that every moment is a precious, unrepeatable gift. And when you live this way, a new courage arises, the courage to face your own imperfections. Discipline 7, the strategy of truth, admit when you're wrong and pivot fast. In the silent theater of the human ego, there is no drama more common or more destructive than the desperate need to be right. We see it everywhere, in arguments that escalate over trivialities, in leaders who steer their companies toward disaster rather than admit a flawed strategy, in people who cling to broken relationships for years, all to avoid the simple, searing pain of saying, I was wrong. To the ego, being wrong feels like a form of death. It is a blow to our self-image, a crack in the armor of our perceived competence. And so, we defend our errors with more energy than we use to seek the truth. We rationalize, we deflect, we blame, we construct elaborate fortresses of justification around our mistakes. We become lawyers for our own limitations. The Stoic, however, understands that this is a losing game. Their loyalty is not to their ego, it is to reality. They see the truth not as a threat, but as a guiding light. And therefore, they embrace a habit that is as rare as it is powerful, they practice the art of rapid, unemotional course correction. They are not afraid to be wrong, they are afraid of staying wrong. Marcus Aurelius gave us the perfect mantra for this discipline: if someone can prove me wrong, show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth, which never harmed anyone. What harms us is to persist in self-deception and ignorance. This is not a sign of weakness, it is the ultimate sign of intellectual strength and confidence. It takes far more courage to admit a mistake than to defend one. The person who can calmly say, "You've made a good point, I hadn't considered that. I was wrong," is not a person to be trifled with. They are demonstrating that their attachment to reality is stronger than their attachment to their own pride. They are dangerous because they learn and adapt at a speed that the ego-bound person cannot comprehend. Consider the corporate world. In 2011, Netflix, then a dominant DVD buy-mail service, made a catastrophic decision. They announced they were splitting their business in two, a DVD service called Quickster, and a separate streaming service, effectively forcing their customers to manage two accounts and pay significantly more. The customer backlash was immediate and ferocious. The company's stock plummeted, and it lost 800,000 subscribers in a single quarter. It was a public relations disaster of epic proportions. The typical corporate response would have been to double down, to release press statements defending the strategic rationale, to wait for the storm to pass. But CEO Reed Hastings did something remarkable. Within weeks, he killed the Quickster plan completely. He published a public apology, unequivocally admitting, "I messed up. I owe everyone an explanation." He admitted the mistake, absorbed the public humiliation, and pivoted the company's focus entirely to streaming. It was a painful, costly, and humbling reversal. It was also the decision that saved Netflix and set the stage for its global dominance. Hastings chose truth over ego, and that made all the difference. You can cultivate this habit in your own life. It begins with shifting your internal goal from winning the argument to finding the best outcome. Here is your training. The next time you find yourself in a disagreement, whether with a partner, a colleague, or a friend, your mission is not to prove your point. Your mission is to actively search for the merit in their position. Listen not with the intent to rebut, but with the intent to understand. Ask clarifying questions. Can you help me understand why you see it that way? And if you find even a small percentage of truth in what they are saying, you must voice it immediately. That's a fair point. Or, I see what you mean there. This simple act diffuses the ego-driven nature of the conflict and transforms it into a collaborative search for truth. Furthermore, conduct a weekly mistake audit. At the end of each week, write down one thing you were wrong about. It could be a small factual error, a misjudgment of a situation, or a poor decision. Then write down what you learned from it. The goal is to normalize the state of being wrong, to see it not as a failure of character, but as a necessary and welcome part of the growth process. The person who is quick to admit fault is trusted. The person who can pivot without shame is resilient. They waste no time defending indefensible positions. They learn, they adapt, they move on, while 90% of people are still stuck in the first stage of the argument, desperately trying to protect an ego that was never the true source of their strength in the first place. Discipline 8, forge your own mind. Don't let the crowd think for you. There is a subtle gravity that pulls on the human mind, a force as powerful and as invisible as the one that holds the planets in their orbits. It is the gravity of the herd. The desire to belong, to be accepted, to conform, is one of our most deeply ingrained instincts. To stand apart from the crowd, to think a thought that is not sanctioned by the group, is to risk social exile, which, for our ancient ancestors, was a death sentence. And so, we learn to conform. We laugh at the jokes we don't find funny. We nod in agreement in meetings when our gut tells us the plan is flawed. We adopt the political and social opinions of our chosen tribe without rigorous, independent examination. We mistake the warmth of consensus for the light of truth. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, we outsource the most critical function of our existence. We let the crowd think for us. The Stoic views this as the ultimate form of slavery. To hand over your reason, your prohairesis, as Epictetus called it, your faculty of choice and judgment, to any external group, no matter how well-intentioned, is to forfeit your humanity. They understood that the crowd is not a source of wisdom, it is a source of emotional contagion. Fear spreads through a crowd like wildfire. So does outrage. So does foolishness. The crowd does not reason, it feels. It does not deliberate, it reacts. To live a life of wisdom and integrity, you must be willing to stand intellectually alone. This is not a call for contrarianism for its own sake. It is not about disagreeing with the majority just to be different. It is about ensuring that your own beliefs are the product of your own diligent, honest, and courageous reasoning, even if they happen to align with the majority. The key is that the verdict comes from your own internal court of reason, not from the roar of the public square. Think of the story of Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor in the 1840s. He worked in a Vienna hospital where the mortality rate from childbed fever in the ward attended by doctors and medical students was 5 times higher than in the ward attended by midwives. This was a mystery that plagued the medical community. Semmelweis observed, he gathered data, and he formed a radical hypothesis: the doctors were carrying cadaverous particles on their hands from performing autopsies to the delivery room. He proposed a simple, revolutionary solution: handwashing with a chlorine solution. When he implemented this, the mortality rate in his ward plummeted to the same level as the midwives. The data was undeniable. And yet, the medical establishment did not celebrate him. They ridiculed him. The idea that a gentleman doctor's hands could be unclean was a profound insult to their collective ego. They could not see the truth because it contradicted the consensus of their tribe. Semmelweis refused to back down. He fought for his data, for his reasoning, against the entire weight of the medical establishment. He was eventually driven from his post, and he died in an asylum, a broken man. But he was right. Years later, Louis Pasteur's work on germ theory would vindicate him completely, and Semmelweis would be hailed as a pioneer of antiseptic policy. He stood alone, armed only with his reason and his observations, against the gravity of the herd. He paid a terrible price, but he never surrendered his mind. How do you train this muscle of independent thought in your own life? Here is your training. First, practice the art of the information diet. For 1 week, consciously reduce your consumption of opinion-based media, cable news, social media commentary, editorial articles. Instead, increase your consumption of raw data and primary sources. Read the study, not just the headline about the study. Read the historical document, not just the opinion piece about it. This forces your mind to do the work of interpretation, rather than passively absorbing someone else's. Second, conduct a belief audit. Choose one belief you hold strongly, perhaps about politics, money, or health. For the next 30 minutes, you must play the role of a determined opponent. Your only goal is to find the most compelling, intelligent, and well-reasoned arguments against your own position. This is not about changing your mind, it is about testing the foundations of your beliefs to see if they can withstand rigorous intellectual pressure. The person who is unafraid to think alone becomes a beacon of clarity in a world of noise. They are not easily swayed by trends, panics, or popular delusions. They are grounded, centered, and possess an intellectual sovereignty that is the hallmark of a truly free and unshakable mind. And when they face the inevitable pain of life, they do so not with the borrowed courage of the crowd, but with a strength they have forged themselves. Discipline 9, The Alchemist's Fire, redefine suffering on your own terms. Life will bring you to your knees. This is not a possibility, it is a certainty. You will face loss, you will experience failure, you will know betrayal, and you will feel pain so profound you believe it might shatter you. In these moments, the world will offer you a pre-written script. The script is titled Victim. It encourages you to see your pain as a tragedy, a cosmic injustice, a wound from which you may never recover. It invites you to a life of resentment, bitterness, and self-pity. 90% of people accept this script without question. They allow their pain to define them. Their suffering becomes their identity, the central story they tell about their lives. The Stoic, the alchemist of the soul, refuses this script. They take the raw, leaden material of their suffering and, through the fire of their perception, they transmute it into gold. They do not deny the pain. They do not suppress it. They face it, they honor it, and then they ask the most powerful question a human being can ask in the face of adversity: how can I use this? This is the discipline that sits at the apex of Stoic practice. It is the idea that the obstacle in the path is not an obstruction to the path, the obstacle is the path. It is the principle of amor fati, a love of one's fate. Not a passive acceptance, but an active, joyful embrace of everything that happens, good or bad, as necessary, as fuel, as the perfect raw material for the cultivation of virtue. The ultimate embodiment of this principle is Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He was stripped of everything: his family, his home, his possessions, his manuscript for a book he had been writing, his very name, which was replaced by a number tattooed on his arm. He lived in a world of unimaginable suffering, starvation, and constant death. In this abyss, where any sane person would have seen only meaningless, brutal suffering, Frankl performed a miracle of perception. He decided that while the Nazis could control his body and his environment, they could not touch what he called the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. He began to see his suffering not as a punishment, but as a challenge. He saw his own pain as an opportunity to study the human spirit under extreme duress. He would give his meager rations of bread to men who were sicker than he was, not just out of kindness, but to prove to himself that he could still make a choice, that he was still a human being. He found meaning in helping others, in imagining lecturing about the psychology of the concentration camp after the war, in holding on to the image of his wife. His suffering was not erased, but it was transformed. It became purposeful. It was the fire that forged his philosophy of logotherapy, which is based on the idea that the primary human drive is not pleasure, but the pursuit of what we find meaningful. He did not just survive Auschwitz, he used it to become one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century. He did not accept the script of victim. He wrote his own script, titled Survivor, Healer, Teacher. This is the power you hold. You cannot choose your hardships, but you have absolute power to choose the meaning you assign to them. Here is your final and most important training. The next time you face a significant hardship, a rejection, a failure, a painful loss, you must perform a 3-step alchemical process in your journal. Step 1, Objective Description. Write down exactly what happened, using the objective language we practiced in Discipline 5. Strip away all emotional labels and judgments. I was not selected for the job I interviewed for. Not, I failed and my career is over. Step 2, the test. Ask and answer the question, if this hardship is a test, what virtues is it testing in me? Is it testing your resilience? Your humility? Your courage? Your patience? Your creativity? Be specific. Step 3, the reframing. Complete this sentence, this experience, while painful, is an opportunity for me to. For example, an opportunity for me to reassess my career goals and find a path that is a better fit for my true strengths. Or, an opportunity for me to learn how to handle rejection with grace and to build a more resilient ego. This is not about pretending the pain doesn't exist. It is about refusing to let the pain be the final word. It is the act of taking the poison of adversity and transforming it into the medicine of wisdom. The person who masters this discipline is truly unshakable. Life can throw its worst at them, and they will only become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. They do not fear the fire, because they know they are the alchemist who can turn it into light. We have journeyed together through the 9 core disciplines of the Stoic mind. We have learned to distinguish what we can control from what we cannot, to rehearse for adversity, to find the sacred pause between stimulus and response, to question our own stories, to see the world objectively, to live in the light of our mortality, to embrace our own fallibility, to think for ourselves, and finally, to find meaning and opportunity in our suffering. These are not 9 separate tricks. They are an integrated system, a complete architecture for building an inner citadel. They are the tools by which you cease to be a passive spectator in your own life and become its conscious, deliberate architect. The world will continue to be chaotic, unpredictable, and often unfair. People will continue to act in ways that are disappointing and irrational. This will not change. But you can. You can choose to stop being a fragile vessel, tossed about by every wave of fortune and emotion. You can choose to forge yourself into a lighthouse, grounded, steady, and a source of clarity in the storm. This path is not easy. It requires daily practice, unwavering honesty, and profound courage. It is a path that the majority will never choose, for they prefer the comfort of their reactive habits to the demanding work of self-mastery. But you have walked this far. The choice is now yours. Will you continue to be a slave to your circumstances, or will you rise to become the master of your mind? If this journey to build a stronger, more resilient mind has resonated with you, and you are committed to this path of inner work, then I invite you to make that commitment real. Subscribe to our channel, BAudio, and join a community dedicated to exploring the depths of Stoic wisdom. Give this video a like as a sign to yourself and others that these ideas have value and deserve to be spread. Each like helps this message find its way to someone else who may be struggling in the storm. And finally, leave a comment below. Tell us, which one of the 9 disciplines will you begin practicing today? Making a public declaration is a powerful first step. Your journey to becoming unshakable has already begun. Thank you for walking the path with us.